This really opened my eyes. The workers crafting with swords casually piled stacks of processed square clay onto the ground. Then they used their feet to stomp on the clay to stretch and flatten it out. They repeated this process while raising the clay pile and simultaneously adjusting the surrounding sides. It turns out this is the traditional handcrafted process of making pottery jars. Only at the end did I realize what it means to have true skill among the people. The craftsman uses a string as a clay knife to control the thickness of the shaped clay in front of him, cutting it into uniform clay blocks. Next, they are laid out on the workbench, and with both hands and a scraper, the uneven surface formed after mixing the clay is adjusted to be absolutely smooth and flat. Using this jar as a mold, the bottom is laid out in advance. The processed clay pieces are stuck around the inner wall, adjusting the joints between them for a perfect merge. This completes the initial framework. Next, the craftsman rolls the clay into long strips, filling it up layer by layer from the bottom of the jar, flattening and spreading the clay to ensure it all fits tightly, enhancing the texture of the shaped bottom. The inner wall is then refined again with a scraper to achieve an absolutely smooth and rounded touch. Afterwards, excess clay along the edges of the mold is cut away. The craftsman will place a cover on it, and the two of them will carefully flip the jar over, removing the fabric from the bottom pad and gently demold the formed inner structure. The processed jar body is suspended above the ground to ensure air circulation. Now, only half of the work is done. To shape a complete pottery jar, the craftsman must also process the other half. On the mold used, one can see the carved patterns on the inner wall, and the opening is larger. There is no need to seal the bottom in advance. Just a circle needs to be attached around the inner wall while leaving the mouth open. Similarly, a ring of clay is filled to reinforce the shape. After repeated refining and adjustment by the craftsman, the entire inner wall becomes smooth. The excess bits, including around the mouth, are also cleaned up, completing the other half of the jar. Once it is successfully demolded, the surface reveals beautiful patterns. These processed shapes need to air dry for several hours. As time passes, they will be moved from indoors to outside under the sunlight to dry completely. Once thoroughly dried, assembly can begin. The craftsman will take more clay and apply it around the edges to be joined, acting as an adhesive for the assembly of the two parts. He also takes care of the flaws at the inner and outer wall joints, smoothing out any visible marks. The outline of the jar begins to emerge, but it is not yet complete. The craftsman continues to apply clay around the joints. A pottery jar is composed of 3 parts. Once the top layer is installed properly, the joint must align perfectly for the whole project to be considered a success. The mouth of the jar is smoothed and rounded with a scraper. After another half hour of drying, they are moved one by one to another workspace for the critical glazing process. The craftsman pours the prepared glaze from top to bottom over the jar, coating the entire body. The glaze around the bottom edge must be scraped off individually. Once fully air-dried, a second layer of glaze is applied to deepen the jar's color before the final firing. The craftsman places them into a kiln, firing for several hours under intense heat, which signifies the end of the process. As the hardness increases, the duration also extends, making it very suitable for home use in pickling vegetables. So, how much do you think such a traditional pottery jar is worth?